Welcome everybody to our special city council meeting today on November 20th, Friday, November 20th. Today we're going to be approving minutes and reviewing the overnight accommodations with our wonderful staff member, Nora Shepard. I just want to, before I call for a motion to approve minutes, I wanted to just say why we're doing minutes. It is, or Joel, if you want to speak to that.
So normally we wouldn't do minutes at a meeting like this, but we are trying to get the enterprise zone passed for the cities for tax structure for members of the business community. And part of that application process required us to pass a resolution and then take that resolution and the minutes from the meeting that resolution was passed, and those have to be submitted with the application for that zone. So we tried to get the minutes on this so we could quickly get them approved, to get them with that application so we can get that zone approved.
So that is why we're doing minutes, in case it was of question for anyone. So having said that, item number 1, approval of the minutes. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes as submitted. Oh, you want the dates? November 12th and November 18th.
Thanks, Tawny. Is there a second?
There was a couple, I will second, yes, I will second.
Thank you, Karen, for
Yes,
your second discussion on the minutes.
So there's a couple of typos, and I didn't see an availability to correct those. Do you guys, does it matter? Okay, okay.
And can I just ask you a really quick question? This was in my Utah League of Cities and Towns book, but I don't know that it's accurate. Do we need in the minutes to note which council members were absent, or is that just indicated by default from who's present? It says that in my book, but I don't know that it's a manual. So
We do. Is it not included in there?
well, in the 18th ones, I think it says that I and Karen and Tawny were here. It doesn't happen to say that Mike and Kaylin and the mayor were absent.
Yeah, just include. We just
Okay.
need to include they were absent.
Okay. Any other comments or additions at this time? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0. Moving on to section 2, proposed ordinance 2019-30, an ordinance amending the City of Moab Municipal Code, section 17.21, C2 Commercial Residential Zone, and 17.31, Resort Commercial Zone, to allow new overnight accommodations subject to revised development standards. I want to commend staff for the way in which this was noticed in our agenda. I feel that this was very clear, and we've had conversation with community members about how we notice things in our agenda, so good job. This is a very clear agenda item. Nora, take it away.
Okay, I'm still kind of foggy from the Planning Commission meeting last night.
Tell us what happened.
But
Night's sleep, Nora?
no, I really didn't. But that's okay. I'm here. So last night we had it was a really good discussion. We did have a public hearing, and there were two people. Two people who spoke, and then we had received a bunch of emails, which I have forwarded to you all, including one that came in this morning, just for your information. As we were talking, it became evident that there were a couple things that, in order for the Planning Commission to feel comfortable forwarding a recommendation, they wanted some clarity from the City Council. And quite frankly, I do as well. But we clarified some things, and what I guess the things I need clarity on are metering, and I know Mike has some ideas about that. They are in favor of metering. The Planning Commission has some different opinions about that, but they're all in favor of some kind of a metering system so that we can manage the rate of change. The other item was commercial uses, particularly in the RC zone, and whether and how we incentivize projects so that will actually do meaningful commercial that is available for residents and visitors, depending on the location. And we had a good discussion about that. But they do need your input also on that item. And there was some discussion about open space and civic space. I think I can clarify those. So that was, a majority of the discussion was talking about metering and building size and scale.
When you
and
say metering,
incentives.
is it water metering?
No, just metering new development. So some way to measure.
Oh,
and-
size, so it's,
And limit the number of units.
So
or-
potentially putting a cap to say 200 rooms
Per
per year. And once you hit that number, then no more applications are accepted.
that's what I thought, but then when you said Mike, I was like, oh, is it a water thing?
No,
So,
he sent an
thank you.
email right before this meeting.
Okay.
That you probably haven't seen, but I caught, so it has a
Got it.
whole bunch on the metering, and I look forward to this discussion. The Planning Commission, talking about metering, the Planning Commission, a couple of them feel that the projects that are in the pipeline that have not been constructed should be included in the first year's allocation, whatever we decide that is. And then there are others who weren't as interested in that. They didn't make a motion, but there was some discussion certainly about that. In addition, they really want the metering to be tied to something rational, like water, or our ratio between permanent residents and overnight visitors and accommodations. Something that that we have some rational basis for developing some kind of a program to allow a certain amount of growth every year to control the rate of change. So that was basically the discussion, and we're looking for input from the city council on really the size and commercial use issue, and then on metering. So I'm happy to talk about either one of those in whatever order you wish, or we could just, however you want to hold to conduct the meeting, Mayor.
Well, I feel like we've all had time to review, and I feel like I want to give each council member the opportunity to comment on any little specifics. I know that I just have a couple comments, so maybe I can start, and then we can just go with each council member with any thoughts or specifics that they would like to share, and then we can get into these planning commission topics if they haven't already been discussed. Does that seem?
Yeah, that sounds
good?
great. One
Okay.
thing that we talked about last night that was substantive is I drafted the ordinance so that overnight accommodations in the RC zone specifically, they're allowed 2 stories, and that then we kind of clarified an incentive so they could go to 3 stories, an additional 10 feet. And if they provide commercial uses beyond which are sort of ordinarily associated with a hotel, and that, for example, if they did a 20,000 square foot store, or a farmer's market or something that was like 20,000 square feet, then they could get an additional 20,000 square feet of commercial floor space and an additional level. So we're trying to provide an incentive for them to really provide that commercial. We talked about even if it's smaller retail spaces within the structure, but there are maybe 2 or 3, that would be great. Or most of those parcels are large enough that they could do overnight accommodation and do another little commercial building with various uses in it. So we're trying to provide incentives by limiting the building height initially and then granting an extra story. The other option that they could do to get that extra story and square footage is to provide affordable housing, affordable employee workforce housing above and beyond what's required by our Wahoo ordinance, or donate land upon which they can be built. So those are some clarifications.
Okay, well, I'll start. First of all, thank you so much to you, your staff, and the Planning Commission. I am so excited about what you are presenting to us. And I am just really encouraged because I feel in talking with community members that while there has been the sentiment of homes, not hotels, that this is really the balanced approach to say, well, if we were going to build hotels, though, what do we want it to look like? And so this is a pointing positive approach, and I'm just so grateful for the work. A couple of things, and these are just like little details because of my experience with solar and gray water that I just wanted to add. Under energy, which is section A, number 3 deals with the energy requirements. I want to say Section A energy is really awesome. The only thing that I have a comment about regarding energy is the way in which we are measuring it. So with net zero certifications, usually it's performance-based, so you get the data a year after the building has operated. So I'm almost wondering if that requirement, instead of a certification through these, instead of certification, what we can instead do is a letter of what would it be? So it would be a letter from the solar installer, from the contractor, showing a letter of proof from the contractor showing that the sizing, the load of the building is sized, the solar is sized at 80% based on the estimated load of the building. Does that make sense? So instead of so certification happens as post-performance, and we're saying you get to build if. So it's just a timing thing, and I think that it can be solved through a letter from the contractor proving the sizing to be accurate for the use, as opposed to certification. Certification is expensive, and I don't know that we want to go so far in requiring certification, but you can kind of achieve that with contractor sizing as opposed to certification. So that was the only thing in energy that I wanted to propose as an amendment to this. It gives us the same, I think we achieve the same goal without putting undue stress of certification on the contractor.
Yeah, and that was really the intent is, we want energy to be efficient, as efficient as possible. And so we didn't require things like LEED or, but if someone if they choose for whatever reason to go through that certification, that's great for us. So we accept that as a way to gain energy efficiency if they are actually certified by one of those. But the alternative is to come up with another means, solar probably, to provide energy on site, so.
Yeah, so like if you contract with a solar provider to build solar on a unit, then that provider is going to say, do the estimate and then give a quote of what is required to achieve 80% on-site renewable. And I think that would be just as sufficient in reaching our goals as certification. So I wanted to offer that as a possible amendment. And then the other was...
Ask a question based on that? What if, I'm not saying that anyone would do it nefariously. What if their estimate isn't correct? How do we rectify that? If the contractor underestimates for some reason or it's not sufficient, I don't want to punish anyone, but what's our recourse if that happens?
That is a really good question.
Nora, is it possible that as they apply that those plans could be reviewed to make sure that they're what they need to be prior to approval?
Yeah, I mean, we would check that before we issue building permits, but, what what do we do if 6 months down the line, we find out that it's only providing 30% of the electricity? You know, is there, I think that's your question, is
Yeah,
there some
yeah.
mechanism to then go back and say?
Yeah.
I mean, does the building owner just have to install enough that it's meeting the needs of that building, or?
It almost feels like it would have to be a good faith requirement, so they submit it with
Yeah,
what they think.
and that's okay,
Well,
but,
yeah, but so we review it, they put it in, and if we thought it was 80%, they thought it was 80%, this building goes in and it's 30 or 40%, then as we go forward as the reviewing body, we need to increase what we're requiring of people because we're learning as we go that it's not enough. I don't think it would be fair to the developer to
Well,
go back and say,
I'm just gonna say that we have the capacity in the building department, so Barry is, he was, prior to working for the city, did HERS rating certifications. Like, he's very experienced with understanding loading. And if something were to happen and we had a new building inspector, I would hope that that would be part of their skill set that would be required, or they would do the training if hired. But I believe that Barry would be able to review a solar plan and look at the load calculation and make a good decision, and then that would not require them to get a certification.
yeah, the hypothetical is almost a worst-case scenario that you're presenting.
It is,
Yeah,
it
like, I
is.
don't think that we'd actually come off that far.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because that was one of my big questions, is if we have these energy efficiency new code standards, and who's gonna be offering the technical assistance, and it sounds like Barry can do that, who's gonna be implementing these energy goals, and then do we have, because this is a big ask, and so who's gonna be the one on the ground answering the questions for the developers, and providing a feedback loop after we implement these? And so if Barry is capable of that, I mean, I think the biggest point is, you know, we have building design, construction, and then enforcement. And so
That's right.
so the plan reviews and the inspections, that's a big part of this whole program.
That's right.
Is that something that Barry's gonna be capable of doing on his own?
I think Barry and Rosemary together probably have a lot of those skills. But as with any development, kind of the burden lies with the developer to prove that they can meet a certain standard. So-
Right, they will submit from a contractor a plan, just like they
Right.
would, an architect would draw the plan. And then our building department will review it for meeting code.
And can I address that as well? It kind of depends on what you guys pass, right? Like, so sustainability, building inspection, engineering, we have staff in-house that can review it to a degree. If we pass something that we're not capable as a staff to review and determine as to whether or not it's going to be compliant, what we'll do is we'll require that be reviewed outside of city staff, and that cost be carried by the developer. And so if we have to go outside of us in order to get that review, we will, and we'll make the development responsible for that cost.
Yeah.
We don't prefer to do that, but that is an option if we're unable to do that, provide that level of review.
And I honestly don't want to require developers to do any kind of certification unless they choose to do it.
Yeah, it would be their choice.
So along those lines, and I was hoping to just ask the council this question. So our end goal is, we really do want energy efficiency. I'm like, that would be fabulous. So can we, just like you guys talked about last night, of offering the gross floor plan additions or higher levels, can we do that with energy as well? So if, like, we have a beginning, you know, so that's the basic level of energy levels, and then you have, so it's maybe silver, and then we go gold, and then platinum. I mean, could we offer density options for
Based on energy as well?
Yeah, like
That-
you get you get a credit.
Almost make it so if we increase the number of rooms or overnight accommodations, but if the level of sustainability comes up, that level actually has less impact than the minimal, then it's actually beneficial to
Yes.
the city to allow more because we're getting a better sustainability product.
Yes.
Well, you know what, let's, when we get to size, let's talk about how energy could be that.
Can I add one last devil's advocate request then? If we're going that far, can someone give me some professional advice? Just because it sounds like technologically it's possible to reach the 80, but because I feel like part of my job is to offer some security to the residents. I know we had the recommendation that people go from 80 to 100 with RECs, but it's just a recommendation. Can we require, if you fall short of 80, that you get to 80 with RECs?
Well, I was wondering what the council thought about that too. The thing
I don't want to keep falling short of the 80 and not really.
The thing about the 80, requiring 80 as part of the development on site, I know projects that are 100% net renewable but have zero solar or just a small percentage of solar on the rooftop. To me, rooftop is an asset to the property owner. If they choose to not build that asset but pay for it through subscriber solar, then that is, up to them. However, there's only so much subscriber solar available.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying like reach your whole 80 with RECs. Like I'm not in favor of that. But say, a year later your report comes back and you're at 65 or something. Is there any way you would write into this like, okay, well you guys fell short, but you can make up this 15%? And we realize you can't rebuild the building or something, but I mean where they've pre-agreed, like if they're somewhat short, they are going to pick up that part with RECs.
And just from a staff perspective, that's something we would have to do some research
Okay.
on, it, whether or not it would fall into an exaction or not. I'd have to research it.
So requiring that 80% at time of construction at least secures that project's going to be 80% renewable.
May I chip in on this subject, if I may? Well, I'm an engineer, and frankly, I'm dubious that 80% is doable, or it depends on how you count energy. So basic questions are, does that count the electrical consumption as well as the gas consumption, for example? Do you know, Nora? I mean, because...
I don't know.
If so, the answer to being net zero or net renewable is that you probably would not do natural gas. Natural gas wouldn't be part of your energy portfolio if you were trying to be
But if
net
it
renewable.
were, under these regulations, would you require whatever energy you generate on site to compensate for the energy consumed by the
So
natural
it's
gas?
so difficult to be net zero with natural gas
That's my point.
that I don't think, like if we require 80%, like they're going to do an all electric hotel.
Or 20% gas, right?
Or
Above the 80, right?
Yeah.
So Nora, you mentioned last night that other communities have done this 80% kind of thing. Could you, to alleviate my skepticism, I'm an engineer and I got 12 panels on my little 2,400 square foot roof, and I do not have swimming pools and air conditioning, and I have blah, 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 on and on and on. I just don't think they can do it. But I can be convinced if you can show me, point me to
Mike,
evidence
there's,
somewhere.
I can send you a link, so Boulder, I mean, I hate to use that as the example city, but they have actually gone to 100%, and they have, all their code compliance is, I'll send you the link to look at that, is what they've done. But it's a whole building energy efficiency, so it's your HVAC, it's your lighting, it's your
That's
water,
right.
it's, we can talk solar, but how is that?
All the other
more
building efficiencies and
efficiencies.
insulation will require
Yes.
less.
So if the building is
Electrical.
super efficient, you need far less energy, so you start with building efficiency. So then you're required to do less panel. But
Well, I
then
understand all that,
remember,
Emily.
too,
That's the thing.
that
Karen, if you
the
can point me to
hotels
that,
are
that would
gonna
be
have
wonderful, all right?
and the hotels
And
are
Nora, if
gonna-
you have anything else you can point me to, I would
Yeah,
appreciate
we
that.
did, actually, the county staff did the research on the energy stuff. We kind of divided and conquered. And I do have some of that background information. I will try to dig it up.
Yeah,
I'll
I
dig
mean,
it up.
think about it, hot tubs, pools.
Well, they
No, no,
might
no, no.
not do a hot tub because they can't afford it because of
Well,
their energy
that's the
budget.
point I'm driving at here. You're gonna run into resistance, all right? If you effectively, because of this requirement, require hotels to not to pursue these sorts of amenities and not to pursue natural gas, then there could be some resistance. That's what I'm trying to say.
So, and just remember two things. One, parking lots can be shaded with solar, And so that's additional square footage aside from the roof. And number two, if they don't have the energy, if they can't produce the energy to run a swimming pool, we are happy to welcome their guests to our city pool. So there are, right? There are still resources. Yeah.
So with all due respect, let's move on, okay? Because this, we're at a lot of other more
Yeah,
important
yep.
subjects.
The other logistical thing, and this is with the rainwater catchment.
Right? Yeah, there's a sentence that's left off there.
Well, the Division of Water Rights does not require people to apply for water rights to collect rainwater.
I don't think you have to.
So there's a size requirement of what you can collect.
Right.
But there's not a requirement to obtain a permit, there's not a requirement to get water rights to do so. When you,
Right, unless it's over a certain amount.
I think from what I understand is you don't get to collect more rainwater than a certain limit, and you do not need water rights to collect that. Is that correct, Carly?
To a certain amount, yeah.
So I don't know that we need to say that line.
Okay,
A feasible rainwater catchment system would be sized to up to what is allowable by the state, and then that's just a permit, that's just part of the permit.
okay.
It's just a,
It's
yeah,
it's a
you don't have to get
clarification,
water
and
rights
it's a
for
good
it.
one. I don't remember even who inserted that other language. But this, there's so many sort of authors. But, okay, there's a better way to say it, and I understand that.
Can I ask one quick question, and this is a legal question? Are we potentially stepping into a realm of going beyond energy requirements at the state, and can the state come back and say, oh, hey, municipality, you cannot, you're overstepping your bounds? Like,
They definitely can.
Yeah.
Sure, I mean, they can, and that's a concern. When we started this process, we heard that energy efficiency was a really important piece, and that's kind of why we've gone the way that we have, but further research may show that it's not practical. And as I've mentioned a couple times into the Planning Commission, these are pretty cutting edge, and we will need to figure out in 6 months or a year what works, what doesn't, what we want to adjust. We may want to back off some of the restrictions. They end up being problematic for people to actually meet. And so there will be some growing pains with this for sure.
so is there a way that we flip it on its head and just incentivize the snot out of it instead of, I mean, really, when you're a builder, you're looking at cost efficiencies, your return of an investment. So how can we get what we want, but do it in a way that is potentially not mandatory, but highly profitable to do, yeah.
So there is the bonus density regarding the housing affordability, the third story. But I feel like with water and energy, from a builder's perspective, knowing exactly what's required is very helpful. So having a baseline, and so I like what you said about the baseline for energy and then bonus for more. But right now, the way that it's written is they're 100% net zero. So I don't know how you can get better than net. You can't really, net positive is kind of not, I don't know. I don't know that that's that you really, asking a developer to be more than net zero is net zero. So we could back off on the energy requirements and then bonus up. But I like having the baselines for energy and water, because then it's really clear to the developer, all right, I gotta get a solar contractor, a rainwater, or a plumber that knows rainwater, put it into the building, and then I'm gonna be able to build a pro forma around that.
And I'm totally for that. I just would like to set us up in a strong position where we're not, the first builder who comes in is like, whew, I can't do this, there's no way. And we're like, oh, okay, that was, we were asking too much. So like if we are gonna ask this, then we have to be able to stand behind it but also not impede the growth.
But remember too, that the point of these requirements is because we have such a large segment of our population that is saying no hotels. And so we're saying, yes, hotels, but with these requirements. So having stringent requirements, to me, politically feels good. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, and
In the conversations I've had with people, they're like, no hotels. And I'm like, but what if they were net zero energy? Then they're like, oh, yeah. And what if they have water requirements? Oh, yeah, that's a lot better. That makes it palatable to say yes to hotels.
But it's not just that, it's a civic space, it's a commercial space. I mean, we got here because of the imbalance in commercial growth outside of hotels. So right now, everybody is building fidget spinners. And so like having that opportunity to say, okay, I mean, and going back to the metering, it's like, okay, maybe fidget spinners isn't what we need to be building in China right now. I mean, because they're passe. Like, it's the next, like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And so, without also encroaching too much on property.
Well, I think Nora hit it a few minutes ago when she said this is pretty cutting edge. And we don't have a whole lot of successful communities to look at and that are the same size, that are exactly like us. There's not anything that we can look at. So, and I agree with you. I don't want to put all these standards into place and then the first person that comes up and says, I can't do it, we back off.
Right.
I want to be able to say, yes, you can do it, and here's how you do it.
so I can do a little bit more research.
Well, and I think too, Nora, that in order for, completely understand where you're going, and we as a staff have similar concerns, what's realistic that we can provide and still be legal? That's why we're having these meetings, though, until we get from you guys what you want. At that point, we'll take it, we'll go do research, and then we come back to you and say, we think this is your odds of being able to uphold this and actually get what you're looking for, get people who can actually do it, and present that back to you once we have what the idea of what you want is, and then say, these are the changes we'd make to make it better from a legal standpoint, better from a builder standpoint, and better from a city standpoint. And then see what changes we want to make to it at that point. But at this point, it's so wide open as to what we could do. It's pointless for us to try and give you advice as to the 1,000 different ways we could do this. So we're wanting you guys to hone in what you want, and then we'll come back to you and say, this is great, or 90% of it's great, 10% of it we don't think in any way would be upheld by a court, or if we got challenged, we think this is your odds with state legislature of being overrun, or we think that this would stand up with them, and just lay out for you guys where you're at with what you're thinking once we have that honed in a little bit.
I got one more thing, and then I'm done. There are, in the resort, commercial frontage roads, and there are also potential flagged lots. And so there are certain site configuration requirements that don't make sense. So I would just suggest that we put an exception to the siting requirements if they are not fronting, or if they're not built directly on a main artery or whatever, then those requirements aren't necessary. I just know that, if we require a frontage road, you don't want to, you're not building to a frontage road. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or
I
in a flag
understand.
lot.
There are unusual circumstances that, like flag lots. Flag lots we measure from setback completely differently. So,
Right. So maybe just a line in site configuration that staff has the ability to waive certain site configuration requirements if they're not applicable because the development's not on a main road.
I can do that.
So who on council wants to go first with comments?
I don't have to be next at some point.
Yeah. I have a really long list, so I guess part of my question is what the recommendation is that I just meet with Nora one-on-one, because a lot of my questions are detail-oriented. So I will stick to the bigger ones now, but I do think that the smaller ones are important and relevant before I can vote on something. I listened to the Planning Commission meeting yesterday. I just wanted to thank Nora and the Planning Commission because that discussion was very useful. And then I also read all the correspondence that came in so far, and I reviewed stuff and took my own notes. And the big issues for me at this point are, the first one that I felt like I came up with Planning Commission too was just this whole time pressure, where a lot of comments about this all just moving very fast and everybody wishing they had more time. So I guess part of what I'm wondering if it will come out of this or the next meetings that we have is our goal really to just move the RC forward, or both the RC and the C2, just listening to the Planning Commission meeting yesterday. Then I feel like we're still getting a lot of questions about why we're not doing overlays, and that San Juan County just decided to do overlays. So just maybe if we can re-clarify that, and if there's any reason to revisit. I am certainly with the metering. I'm totally in favor of metering. Yeah, I think that hopefully we can discuss that a little bit more, because it does seem like there are a lot of factors to take into account there, whether it's water or, I was thinking back on when we got our report on from Public Works and on infrastructure and our critical needs. And I might be remembering this wrong, but I want to think that OB actually said in terms of new sewer, in some ways, we kind of need to catch up on what we have before adding new. And I might have heard that wrong, but I just want to take that into account with the metering too, along with water. And then I didn't know where ratios like are being a resort community, and that being whatever it is, 66% of your units being overnight accommodations, and we're at what, 238, about to go to 250 or 260 something. So what role that plays. And then I just keep trying to revisit as I read through all of this why we did the moratorium in the first place, and my dialogues anyway with community or in meetings about how if and when we brought back overnight accommodations that there should be some net benefit to community. So when I'm trying to read all this, I'm trying to make sure I feel like that's there, and it seems like some of the discussion we're trying to have is still trying to get us there. So hopefully today or at a future meeting we can discuss size, because I heard the Planning Commission discussing the 20,000 versus 60,000, and is that going to be the same in the RC versus the C2? And then it seems like some of the discussion last night too was about mixed use and what kind of uses. And I always think back to the C5, and I don't think its list of uses are maybe totally updated to our community's needs nowadays, but it does seem like the stuff that we aim to do in the C5 is definitely community oriented. So I don't know if that could help with that list somewhat. And yes, there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but I don't want to take up too much time and let other people.
Okay, so very quickly, Nora, yeah, and I watched last night also. Thank you guys so much. It's a lot of work. Let's see. Well, first of all, I agree with the timeline. I've said this over and over again. I don't think it's going to happen this year as much as we might wish. There's too much that hasn't been defined, and I personally won't vote. I mean, if it were put before us on the 10th, things could change, but never say no. But I don't think I would vote for it, okay? Because it's just not ready as much as we might wish. And I do want to have a public hearing in front of council. There's only 2 people that showed up last night. It's not good.
So Mike, that's something that would address, we as a staff would like to have more meetings as well. We'd like to have one potentially, coming weeks. Next week, the 10th, we're having one. We had discussed having a public hearing on December 10th before that next regular city council meeting for this item for another public hearing. It's not required by law. We've met our requirements for public hearing, but we know that you guys tend to like to have more public outreach than is required. And so we, I think, had planned on the December 10th meeting having a public hearing for this item on the agenda.
I'll support Mike on that, and I know we've gotten some correspondence, yeah, from people wanting that too.
Okay.
We have not heard that. I don't, we have to figure out the noticing.
7 days, I think, is the requirement.
Well, it's more for code amendments. But anyway, we'll deal with it.
Can I ask you guys, so feels like it's going too fast for people that are anti-hotel? Or, because I'm sure that as a hotel developer, or somebody that owns property where they'd want to build a hotel, something's better than nothing. So is it really from the community that's anti-hotel that's saying slow down?
I heard it in the Planning Commission from several Planning Commission members yesterday, and I hear it a lot from residents who are like, we don't even know how we're going to absorb the 38%, and then those are people who are asking that maybe gets counted towards metering.
Can I ask where that 38% number came from? I keep hearing that in the community, and I'm like, where's that figure?
So you can look, for example, in the articles that the TI and the Sun did, but it was, and I don't know if Zachariah generated that, but it was taking all the vested units in the city and the county, and the number of units we have now, and the net increase.
Yeah.
And so I don't know
But
what
I
the
think-
breakdown is for the city. You might know what part of the 38% it is.
But I think that 38% is being calculated out of new hotel rooms to other hotel rooms. That's not the entirety of the overnight accommodations that the city is currently floating, right? So for us to be a resort community, we have to hit that 66%, which would be 3,000 units, and we're at 248%. So we're well past 3,000 overnight accommodation capacity, and we're nowhere near 3,000 hotel rooms. So how the city's calculating how we do overnight accommodations versus how that number got generated, the rooms that are coming online are nowhere near 38% of.
I think it's city and county combined.
It's still nowhere near 38% of how we in the state calculate overnight accommodations. It's a much smaller number. So I think that
it's
that number can be misleading.
It's the
to a
total
degree.
current, and
But it would
the
just-
total that are permitted and no certificate of occupancy yet. So it's permitted but not built versus what we have currently, and that percent is 38%
I get that. And my point is,
being built
I get that. And my point is, you're comparing the total rooms
that we currently have.
versus the total of rooms that are coming in. And I'm telling you that from a state standpoint, how we calculate whether we're a resort or community, that is not how we determine. The rooms that are coming on are nowhere near 38% of an increase to how we're calculating it under the state formulas. It's a much smaller number than that. But if you're just comparing the new hotel rooms to the existing hotel rooms, that number's probably accurate. But that's not how we've, as a...
So how does the state calculate?
So there are some hotel rooms in this community that currently are a traditional size of a hotel room, but they have queen bunk beds, and 8 people can sleep in that room. And so that's 8 spots, not one room.
And it's pillow count.
Yes. So I'm not saying it's not a huge increase to the number of rooms and the number of overnight accommodations we're going to have. I just think people hear that 38% number and they think that's on top of everything else, every other shelter, every other RV spot, every other campground, and it's a 38% increase to the whole. And it's not a 38% increase to the whole, is the only point I'm making.
So how hard is it to get that number?
I actually thought about this before this meeting, and I'm going to have, our treasurer department is the department who calculates that and turns it into the state that certifies we're a resort community, and I'm going to have them figure that out. I'm not saying it's not a huge increase, it is. But I think that kind of is misleading, the 38%, because it makes it feel like we're adding to every aspect of overnight accommodations 38%, and that's not. It's 38% to hotel rooms, which is a small percentage of what we're actually doing overall over the top. But I will get you that number so we can have it.
And I'll let Mike have it back. But the other thing I was hearing from people is, we don't even know how we're going to absorb that much growth. But then on top of that, we were the ones who decided we didn't want an overlay for various reasons. But what the case that the county or people who like the overlays are making is that, we'll be visiting each project on an individual basis. And the advantage of not having the overlay is that people will know, okay, well, if I meet these conditions or standards, then I'm in. But some people are concerned that the standards, we haven't had enough time to draw up good ones to at least mitigate, or if not get a net benefit out of the new things that are built. Like, there just isn't enough time to discuss. Like I said, I have a long list. I probably have 50 other questions here, but we don't have time in the meeting to ask them, so that are all relevant.
So Ronnie, I have to step in and just say, like, we made this decision already. So to go back and revisit it is complicated, I think, for staff and for Planning Commission.
I'm not revisiting. I'm just trying to stick to the motion we made when we, which was that we would work expeditiously, but it was not a hard stop. Halloween or
what I'm saying, revisiting whether or not it's overlay versus by right in code.
Okay, well, I'm just letting you all know that a lot of the feedback I'm getting is still questions about why we didn't go with an overlay. So
based on that feedback, though, are you asking that we revisit that decision? Because I think that's what Nora needs to hear from you.
I mean, we as a council haven't had a chance to discuss this, so I don't know if anybody feels like that needs to happen. But yeah, and I don't know if Nora.
Well, we discussed it at the Planning Commission, I thought, pretty extensively.
At the joint work session, that was the one thing that we finalized, and then we did that once before as well. However, you're the decision makers, and you can tell us to go a different direction. It's
conditional use all over again.
Yeah, we have gotten, in the past, we've gotten direction, and we're moving forward based upon that direction. So, if you change direction,
I mean,
let us know so we can move that direction.
I mean, I can say as a council member, I am not a proponent for overlays, because I don't want to be sitting in this position having to decide who gets to build and who doesn't, because I might know them or not know them, and I just feel like if it's in code, it's black and white, and it's the same for everyone who comes forward.
The overlays are much more subjective.
And that was my reasoning then, and I still feel the same, so that's where I'm at with that.
You do too, Tony?
Yeah.
All right, so just to close the door on that subject so I can move on, at a last meeting, when I also complained about the lack of overlays, and you talked me out of it, but you only did so, Nora, because in my mind, at least, on the acceptance of the metering, of some form of metering can be implemented, okay? Because I also am concerned about
some sort of metering, is that what you mean?
metering.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay. And also threw out the idea of what I called I wrote this to you in another, build out capacity. In other words, could we designate some maximum number of rooms in a particular zone at some point as a build out capacity? That was another way of limiting OAs down the road. So, and you said you didn't object to that. So far, there hasn't been any legal objections thrown out to that idea. It remains to be seen if metering will turn out to be legal. But if it's legal and we can do it, then to me that's an acceptable compromise. And I agree with Emily and Karen that the overlay, the arbitrariness of is unfair to the applicants and messy for us. So as long as we can do the metering acceptably, then I will hold off on any further requests to consider overlays. That's where I stand on it. Okay. So if I may, I want to move on. Scope issues. Kalen, I know, is a proponent, he's not here, that we consider only the resort commercial zone at this time, and not C2. They look a lot alike to me, and I don't know why we would want to repeat all the mistakes we're about to make in RC on another zone. So I would hold off on it. And another really easy question for you, Nora. C2 right now is lodging is limited to 10 units or less, which effectively makes it short-term rentals. Are you trying to remove that restriction?
No.
No? It's still 10 units?
No.
Oh, okay.
And
So
that needs to be made more clear.
okay, well, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm just a little curious on some of the standards you might write might not be particularly germane, because something under 10 units is not going to be over 60,000 square feet kind of thing.
Right. But, well, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. That helps. All right. And finally, one other point I want to put into here is I've had this paradigm shift. I was out driving around town on vacation, and I realized that I came to think of Moab as a place where all the water, if you will, flows down into a waterfall and comes right through town, and it can't go anywhere else. That's what's weird about Moab. All right, people drive into town, they can't go around it like you can in most other towns, and people up on the Wasatch Front, that's what they see. They're used to encouraging growth. We're a victim of its own success, and we need to get those guys down here, and Joel and all that, and try to convince them, because they will object to what they're doing, what we're doing, but I think that they will accept all that once they understand what we're up against. So the notion that you can't go around town is my major change in thought. If you could, things might be different, but you can't. So that's, and with the election of these guys, congratulations to all of you, by the way. I'm thinking ahead to my own reelection 2 years hence. And people are going to applaud, oh, environmental, this and that. But I think that the main thing that they're going to either rate me a success or a failure on is traffic congestion in the streets. Okay, that's what really broke open when the crap hit the fan, if you will. And 2 years later, if things aren't better, or some promise that they're going to be better, realistic promises, then I failed in my obligation to them. That's the way I look at it. So that's when I advocate for go slow metering and all that kind of stuff. That's why I do so, because that's the criteria to me.
So you want metering and transportation?
Transportation is a good idea, sure. All those fine, but metering is some way to. I mean, if we just make hotels be net zero,
Yeah, shuttle stops.
we'll get
also.
hotels with net zero, but we'll get more hotels and more cars. Okay. And I did write this that you guys can. I sent this out real late, so.
Yeah. Thanks for sending that.
Sure.
Tony, what you got?
I had a couple of little questions, but in the spirit of the week, and in the interest of time, I'm going to yield my time to Karen. I'll come talk to you
Okay.
at another time.
I was just hoping we would get to metering, because it sounded like one of the big topics from last night. And would love to see if we can make that happen and include the builds that are going to be online and have them included in 2020. I think it's, again, you brought up last night that you don't want to have empty rooms sitting, and so this gives an opportunity to tell a story to commercial growth that, hey, we're looking out for your interests, because really we are. Their success is our success, especially at the city, since all of our general fund money comes from it. So, and then offering, there was some discussion last night about C2, and I was real concerned because there was one of the public came and asked about hotels in C2, and I was like, oh, did I miss something? Did we allow them? So thank you for saying that we have not allowed hotels in C2. I mean, it's for overnight accommodations. And then also, again, that commercial space and finding those definitions of what is going to be okay, because there was that, again, just selling a toothbrush in the lobby. That's not, to me, beneficial to the community. And then, like having smaller spaces, like if you're at 40,000 square feet, if we land on that number, that's, 2,000 square feet of retail space, I believe. And then if we're at 60,000, that's 3,000 square feet of retail space in the hotel. And for me, I don't care if it's on the ground level or if it's up top with a bar. I mean, I think that would be, like to have a little flexibility with where that goes. But yeah, I think metering is.
And the bar could rotate.
Yeah. And then, there was mention of a farmer's market. I mean, that only would work 6 months out of the year, 8 months. So like to have a designated 20,000 square foot space for a farmer's market that can maybe run on a Saturday, that doesn't, so I have to just sort of tighten that kind of stuff down, it feels like. But I'm for having crazy high standards, and then we put that into code, it's very clear, and then we are not deciding on who gets to come in or out. And we all know where this council sits this time, but, elections again are gonna be in 2 years, so, who knows who's gonna be sitting here and what interests are in the pot, so.
Anything else, just technical?
Just parking, I'd like to give consideration to, we just had to, give a parking allowance to a hotel just last week, so, are we requiring enough parking as it is? Especially since there's not gonna be any Main Street parking. So that's something to.
Yeah, and we should require oversized parking.
And what you mean by there's not going to be any Main Street parking is the widening's going to take some spots, not
On
that,
the
not,
north
yeah,
quarter,
not
yes,
that we're
yes,
taking
I'm
it.
sorry, we're not taking all Main Street parking, yes.
Can you just lean in and
Good
say that one more time?
clarification.
Like
Yes.
right into the microphone
Yes,
for me
yes,
there?
not all Main Street, just North Corridor Main Street. But yes, so that, they lost 7 spots, but they added 24. So do they need 24? Does that mean that we need to really look at how much hotels need? Because I went to a USU program and there wasn't that many people. You cannot find a place to park. So, and the event was held there. These are things that we need to, if we don't have public transportation, which I'm really hoping that we decide to move forward with that, then we need to look at our requirements.
And that is something that we're looking at is, we met with the mayor yesterday and we talked about basic design and ideas that we're floating with the parking garage structure that we're doing, and we kind of laid out how we could work into a shuttle system off of that location once we get that up and operating, and shuttle people from that parking structure to other places and where we could implement that. And so we agree as a staff that needs to be considered, and we're trying to figure out, 1, how to tie it into our current infrastructure, and 2, how to pay for it. So.
And creating an easy place for a private shuttle operator to land within the city and at hotels.
Yeah, we definitely want to consider, with the parking structure, a shuttle location where drop-off and pickups can occur, not only for potential city transportation, but potentially to be used by potential vendors who could figure out a system of how that works, but they could have a pickup spot for people who are participating in their activities to their business. So.
Do we need to, thank you, Karen, thank you, everyone, for comments. We still have an hour, so a couple of things. 1, do we need to dig in a little more on this idea of civic space, or is that something that the Planning Commission, if we're all just sort of in general nodding that that's an element to include, that they're gonna do that heavy lift, or do you need more stuff from us? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the civic space
that
thing
make
is
sense?
kind of squishy.
It's squishy. Do we firm it up, or is the Planning Commission gonna firm it
Well,
up?
do you want me, is that something that's of interest to you? And if, and what do you define as civic space? And is it something that you want to include? That's kind of the basic questions.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some examples of what it might look like myself.
Well, I think civic space, this is how, in my mind, civic space is defined. It's like the Gallivan Center. We probably don't have anything that large, but there are concerts there, there are
Conference space.
It's conference, it's outdoor, well, I'm not talking about the buildings, I'm talking about the outside space right now.
Yeah.
There are concerts, there are farmers markets, there are private events, there are weddings, there are all kinds of things, and that's, when you say civic space, that's what my mind goes to. It is, does Salt Lake City own Gallivan Center?
Yeah.
They do, okay. But it doesn't have to be city-owned. It could be privately owned, and and used by the community.
And as staff, we've talked about the fact that we need to look at our impact fees, not the current ones that are in place, but we don't have a public safety impact fee, we don't have a park and park impact fee, we don't have a lot of impact fees even in place for a lot of these things. And there's no reason why, as these developments are coming in, we're not collecting a parks and a public safety impact fee, because they are having an impact. Our law enforcement they are being called out to the hotels for domestic violence and other issues, thefts, other things that are happening in the parking lots of these places. So we need to, and it's staff's job, and we'll be bringing you at some point a new impact fee analysis for some of these different impact fees that we're currently not even collecting as a part of our rate structure, and they need to be collected to provide civic spaces on our end as well through impact fees. So yeah.
I like the idea of daycare as an option in this list of civic space or community benefit thing. So if we're saying a hotel, here are a list of needs for 2020. So maybe we could even publish the list of social civic needs per year. Then conference space, outdoor space, daycare.
When you say daycare, I know what daycare is. That's not what. Are you saying daycare for the community? Are you meaning daycare for the workers that work at that hotel, or some kind of a co-op for hotel
Good question.
workers?
I think what I'm thinking is, like, to operate a daycare, you're held to certain things, like you have to have a sink, there's like infrastructure requirements for daycare in the state of Utah. And so, like, as part of the development, creating a room that meets those requirements, not necessarily being the one to operate it, and not having specifics of who would be cared for during the day, but just that sort of that infrastructure of daycare.
But if a hotel owner chose to designate a room and it met the infrastructure needs, but he or she said, this is exclusively for my employees.
When?
Is that
They'd
acceptable?
have the most employees, they'd have the most dedicated workforce of
Okay.
everybody in Moab.
So it doesn't look just one way.
Well, and I think that if you're looking at, like, what's gonna make me the most amount of money for a hotel development, daycare is gonna be the first thing you would cut from a thing, unless the city said, hey, we're gonna require one of 4 things. You pick. They might pick daycare, because they have to pick a thing. So,
But you're gonna require them to then staff it? I mean, they could build it, but, I mean,
no,
that's.
they could just advertise it as daycare space, and then all of the mom entrepreneurs out there that are doing daycare in their home could rent a space and do daycare and make money, and that, that could help.
Okay, but there's gonna be, I'm just saying the reason the moms are doing it is because they don't have the overhead, they're already paying for it by having it in their homes. It's easier than getting state certified, which also belies the point of having children, I mean, what we're hoping to do is have children educated, not just watched over sitting in their car seats, right? So, I mean, I think you're opening, that's a big ask, and
Yeah, they may not
commercial
pick it,
developer is
but-
gonna have to charge something, and they're not gonna offer that space for free. So they're gonna wanna recoup, again, your ROI on offering those commercial spaces. I mean, you can get a real pretty penny on how much it costs to rent a space on Main Street, so,
And daycare is not lucrative.
no. And typically, those are, nonprofits or state-run, or, I mean, there are entrepreneurs that do it, but they're also trying to get the most bang for the buck. So I don't know how realistic that is. It's a great idea, but.
Well, and it might even be, like, from a hotel perspective, if you were a hotel that provided drop-in daycare, So that you and your husband can like go do a pool date thing and the kid, kind of like, on cruise ships, it's called, it's like a drop and go, like you can drop your kids off in this little place and they've got programming and it's like play care kind of thing. It's never been actualized.
I mean, I like the idea of
City, but
the,
why
a
not?
hotel being able to offer childcare for employee retention. I mean, that's more, I mean, you know.
I'm
can
ready
they
to
off-
go into the daycare business right now to do some of this fun stuff.
Well,
But
I'm just-
space is more expensive and there's not space available, so having this as a possible build. Like a hotel may say, well, we don't have a big lawn to do a thing, or we don't have, but we could do a small room for daycare. And that would check the box for civic space. So the cost, the retail space, if daycare is not competing with retail, if daycare is competing with civic space, then we might see an affordable rental option for daycare providers.
Well, so then we're looking at potentially doing points, like all these things are on a point system. And I mean, do you know, like that's, because I don't know how you would, I mean, do you get 10
Yeah,
points?
I have
a
no
bonus
idea how you would
for-
do this.
I mean,
I'm not saying no, daycare's a dumb idea or we shouldn't do that. I'm just, I agree with Karen. It kind of opens up this Pandora's box of
Yeah, it's
all these
complicated.
other things, and it does complicate it. I don't know how practical it is to require it. I think you could possibly incentivize a developer or a hotel owner to create a space for his or her employees, but I think beyond that and calling it civic space is kind of a stretch.
What if we used energy, like you were saying, Karen, to incentivize? So like make 80% the baseline for energy, and you can either do, and if you do the extra 20%, then you don't have to do civic space or something like that.
But is there any kind of a rational nexus there, I guess?
Yeah,
I mean, we
think
do,
so.
at some
Yeah.
point, we get into the issue of requiring daycare. Is that an issue? And I mean, I could rationalize that hotels and motels generate the need for daycare for sure, but I'm not sure that requiring daycare is, I think it's playing sort of with the marketplace a little too much. And I think what we had talked about with the Planning Commission was providing that extra story of an incentive if they were to build facilities that could provide resident services like daycare or, a small store.
yeah.
or whatever.
doctor's offices or so, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That feels
And
good.
we also, and
That feels
I
good.
mentioned this
Yeah.
to the Planning Commission last night, Landmark is continuing to do work on our little commercial nodes. And so the area that is currently C5, and then, they are coming up with some ideas for some other areas in town to have C5 kind of uses, which ideally are those uses. They're your doctor's offices and your professional offices and daycares and those kinds of things. They're not overnight accommodations at all. So anyway, that effort is going on separately.
So maybe just in that list,
Yeah.
it's just clear that,
It's there.
again, like if it is something, like you offer employee childcare or healthcare services somehow, like just that space for an
Eye doctor
optometrist.
office,
Yes,
yeah.
I mean.
Then you get your
you-
extra floor?
Then you get bonus densities.
So how is it written right now? Because I think the extra floor is tied specifically to affordable housing.
Well, it's right now, the way we talked about it with the Planning Commission, it would be tied to either affordable housing or commercial space. Commercial space above and beyond what they would just put in a hotel. So commercial space that's tied to community need or visitor need in the North Corridor, for example.
Would we need a nexus study if it was a bonus? You know what I
No.
mean? So our rule would be 2 stories. If you want a 3rd story, here's a list of options to choose from.
Yes.
And so then, and currently that list is housing or commercial.
Correct.
And so what we could say is define commercial by this civic space instead of civic space being a whole separate thing? What is that, or did I just make it too complicated? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the instead of having civic space
Yeah.
be a standalone kind of ambiguous, how are we gonna get to that target? Then if somebody wanted their 3rd story, they could get it, they could do the affordable housing or a list of commercial space, specific commercial uses. So then the commercial use would be daycare, optometrist, blah, blah, blah. And then you get your 3rd floor if you provide that on the.
Nora, it seems like last night at the Planning Commission, you guys were having some discussion about this, right? About
Yes.
commercial uses,
Yeah,
and
defining
I got
commercial
interrupted
uses.
and I wasn't able to listen to that part. Did you guys come to any conclusions there or any recommendations about how to?
The conclusion was, if in fact the incentive, the extra story incentive made sense, then we would want to look at those uses that are allowed in the RC a little bit more carefully, and kind of define the kinds of uses that we want to incentivize. That's what this discussion was last night.
So can I just clarify, so anything in the RC zone that we're putting these requirements on is just for overnight accommodations, is that correct?
That's correct.
So any commercial space, so if we have a big box store that goes in that space, what's the largest footprint that we allow in the RC zone?
We have a limitation. We have a specific limitation that excludes big boxes. I think it's, I don't know off the top of my head. But we do have something that talks about limiting the amount of retail space for one retailer in one building or something like that. It's structured.
So do we want to consider offering, like, opening that up for, I mean, I hate to say this, but like if we had a Sprouts or a neighborhood Target or.
An Amazon Marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, and they had to conform to energy standards and also, I mean, that area seems like it could be even more conducive to having more community spaces for daycare and professional offices. I mean, is that part of this discussion or just only overnight accommodation?
We haven't, I mean, I haven't gotten really too far into that discussion, but, you know, we want to incentivize people to put the kinds of uses that the community feels like have been left out because overnight accommodations have been the highest and best use. But saying that, there are other locations in town where some of those uses might actually make more sense. You know, does it make more sense for a daycare to be more central? I don't know. You know, on the corridor, I think it would be really nice to have another small grocery or something like that. And so if that's the kind of thing we want to see, then we should include that in the list of things that you can get extra square footage for.
I'm just wondering if there's going to be some developers who look at our new overnight accommodation standards and like, hell no, that's so expensive. I'm going to do commercial. And so like setting up the correct standards for that too. Like I would love to see that because I think we're going to get there.
I mean, to go back to, you know, our earlier discussion about flag lots and things like that, a smaller grocery store, not a gigantic, you know, super Walmart or whatever, but a Sprouts-sized store or a Whole Foods-sized store, that would, you know, that doesn't necessarily have to face the highway. Because if you had a flag lot that led down to that smaller grocery store, that would be a good use for those kind of lots, and we wouldn't have to dance around with the facing the main street or whatever. A grocery store doesn't have to face.
They think they do.
Well, I know, but when you go to Spanish Fork, some of those little stores that are back off the highway, they really aren't facing a main street. They're on a street, you know, but you have to go down a little series of frontage roads to get there. And if you've got a retailer that has that footprint, then smaller retailers are just going to fall. It makes sense, and a daycare will fit in sort of a strip mall kind of a thing, and the kind of things that we want to encourage.
Right, but I think encouraging more strip malls in the RC is not necessarily what we want to see either.
Probably not, but.
But there is
That
community
could be an
needs.
unintended consequence of all this, so we do need to be careful about that. I hadn't even thought about that.
But then what we're
But the
only
strip
talking
mall?
about is just hotels. And so, I mean, it would be nice to have other amenities besides just hotels down there. And to put that burden of having professional offices or, you know, other, I just.
So burden versus bonus.
Okay, no, that's correct. And so, but I'm just wondering if we could do bonuses for commercial spaces as well, if they hit our marks that we're hoping to hit as a community, which is, you know, carbon offsets and transportation. And, I mean, there's these things that I think can all work together. And so, I mean, we're putting so much emphasis on hotels. There's gonna be a point where that saturation, that we hit that saturation mark. And so there's going to be other growth. I mean, that's what's.
And isn't that what kind of prompted this, is that overnight accommodations were taking over all other commercial growth? And so we do have to concentrate on the standards that we want to see for those overnight rentals, but we also, what's going to take up the vacuum?
Right.
Nora, do we have any way to anticipate how many people are living in the RC or directly adjacent now? I mean, we obviously have the assured housing policy now, and I know, so I'm just, one of the things I'm trying to think through is how many people we're encouraging to live there as employees or nearby, and what their needs are. I just don't want to over long-term, create a type of experience where those people's only option, say for food, is a gas station or a mini market. And so I'm just trying to anticipate, since we are encouraging on-site housing or assured housing, if we have any sense of how many people we're encouraging to live there, but without maybe anticipating the needs they might have. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a good point. This ordinance can't do everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And what we're trying to achieve is to allow somebody to apply for and potentially build, if it meets all the criteria, an overnight accommodation. And if we put in development standards and we do metering, then that will make a difference. Certainly, we could do all these other things as well, and maybe some of them we'll have to do as a follow-up, but this ordinance can't achieve everything. It's just, we're not going to be able to anticipate every eventuality and address every little thing. So
on a high level, higher environmental standards and mixed-use development. Those were the two big, and shuttle transportation ready. No, we already have our WAHU in place. So housing is already being addressed, aside from what we do with the overnight accommodations requirements.
the Planning Commission felt fairly strongly that it would be helpful to include some incentives for yet more housing.
So the third floor housing.
Exactly.
But then the third floor is also our mechanism for other groovy stuff.
Right. But if we have too long a laundry list and a couple of them are gimmies, then people are going to do the lowest hanging fruit first. So, but I can work on something like that.
Which is what Karen is saying, I think, is like, we also want other space besides, like, we wanna see hotel developers, including retail space, and we wanna incentivize that, and so the third story is that
Right.
incentive, and we already have the Wahoo in place, and there's already housing required of hotel developers. So I think what you're saying is reasonable and exists in this current draft. If we add specifically commercial uses, if we redefine what commercial uses is.
And that's that's.
It's in there, we
Planning
just,
Commission was
commercial
recommending that
use.
as well.
Yeah, commercial use bullet points.
Right.
That could be
and
amended
So what
through
I'd like
text
to,
amendment each year or so.
it could. And what I want to hear from the group about what you talked about is, do we want to include additional employee affordable workforce housing as something they could do as an incentive to get the third floor? Or do we want to concentrate on environmental energy standards and mixed use?
I'd say, for me, I'm include it. I mean, it's a need.
Which one?
Include housing, just as another option. Like,
So
this is how
housing,
you can get
commercial
your
use.
density. You can do it through, offering affordable housing for employees or just affordable housing. I'm wondering if we even want to discuss the energy options of going beyond.
I really just like the baseline that has been developed that's in there, and don't touch the environmental standards as part of incentive, just kind of have those baselines.
So,
and
but what
then-
if they went beyond and they
You
went,
can't go beyond net zero is what I was
what
saying.
if you went net positive? And what if that was something that somebody did? Don't you think they could potentially get a bonus?
I would rather I would rather have an environmental baseline and leverage that third story to be compatible use, as opposed to more environmental bonus,
I think,
since the standards are pretty,
from a staff perspective, I think for now, let us include both and let it get it drawn in there, and then we can bring it back to you at a follow-up meeting for you to weed out a little more. Like, I think right now, it's not gonna hurt to include it, like, we're trying to hone in on what to include in, and then I think we should include it and then bring it back for a reduction as we filter it.
If I may, one little nuance about height. I think all this discussion is great. I like the idea of a third story bonus, if you will. My wrinkle in all this is there are some places, particularly in the resort commercial zone on the north side, on the east side of the highway, where the steeply rises and so forth. I've been making an effort to try to protect the view shed. In other words, I don't particularly want hotels built way up the slope, particularly tall ones. So if you feel that way, in contrast to offering a third story as an incentive, which trumps which? In other words, if somebody wants to put in a third floor for beneficial uses, but it would make what some people may perceive as an objectionably high structure built up against steeply rising terrain over on the east side of the highway, what would you prefer?
Well, I'd like to point out that the height, the maximum is still only 40 feet, even if they get that that density bonus. And we're already there. So
we have been there, and then
right.
we took it out of code, but that's where it has been.
I mean, that's what we're living with right now. The one place that it seems problematic is when it is the world mark that is right up against the highway. So if there's setbacks and it doesn't affect the view, I mean,
Nora, you guys addressed that on the west side, right? With the first story on the west side having to step back from
It's on
the-
both sides.
It's on
Yeah,
both.
Absolutely. Yeah, they would have to, step back from the highway frontage so that, I mean, that would be required, whether it's 2 stories or 3 stories, or whether it's on the east side or west side. But Mike, I understand your concern about, we don't want a block view shed. And I'm just trying to think in my head, the parcels along there. Most of them are large enough that we could probably, it could be, a three-story building could be mitigated pretty easily by its placement on the site relative to the road. You know, we could set it back a little bit more so that it's not right there. And so we could, they aren't mutually exclusive, I don't think.
Yeah, okay. Well, you may well be right, and thank you. I mean, I guess what scared me was we had a late-breaking hotel app come in that was perched. It was up there on the north side of the highway, kind of perched up the hill, and I thought, I don't want more of that. So,
Right.
but maybe my concerns are misplaced.
I screwed up and I forgot to add one other thing in addition to our water requirement, low flow fixtures.
That's already
in the
required.
code.
It's not in the what do you mean it's already there?
Building code requires all low-flow efficiency for plumbing.
It already exists.
It already exists.
Yeah.
So all of our new hotels are required to have low flow fixtures.
Yes. Showers, toilets, sinks, everything has to
Okay.
has to meet minimum standards
Okay,
for efficiency.
okay.
Are we gonna get to metering?
Metering?
Have to, because we
Yeah.
have a half an hour left. Does anybody have anything other than metering, a burning anything?
Yeah, at some point, Nora, I wanted to touch on the discussion you guys had about size, the 20,000, 60,000 square feet, and RC versus C2, just because I know you guys discussed that some last night.
So are we going to not deal with C2 right now and just deal with the RC?
That's my vote.
I'm looking for some direction. I think the planning commission was headed that way.
To only deal with RC.
Right.
For the time being, you know. It should be an easy extrapolation once we get this guy out of the way to move.
I agree. And that would be my preference probably too, that I would be working on both, but that we do really the RC.
Do we have anybody in the C2 zone that's like, I want to build some overnight accommodation and would really appreciate our expedience?
I'm sure there are people. They talk to you and not me, generally.
Like, but you haven't heard, and I don't know if that would be a.
Yeah, and you know, we could allow, I can work on the C2, and I don't think it would be that difficult to make it work, but let's, you know, I think it's good to get the RC done if we can.
That seems reasonable.
So Nora, I only say that because how many times have we all written documents and you're trying to describe two situations, you type in the first paragraph and you think, and you get, you know, that many lines, and you think, oh, this applies perfectly, and you copy and paste it down to here.
Right, and it
then
doesn't-
later on you
doesn't
find out,
paste as
oh, it's
well.
worthless, you know, and that's, I don't want to go there.
I agree with that, and I can certainly come up with different stuff for the C2. Or do I spend my time refining the RC, and then once we have that, then I'll go back and revise the C2
I
as
would-
a timing.
I would think
priority.
RC first is probably easier, right? So you're just focusing on one? I don't know.
Yeah.
You tell me. It's your-
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
you.
that's, yeah.
And does that feel good with? your side
Well,
of
and then
staff
we're
who's
going to
heading
take
up to the
those
state?
standards and apply them to other commercial zones.
I just,
Sure.
I mean, we want to be able to do what we do well. And I don't want to do two zones if we're not being able to hone in on what we need to get done. So if we need to only focus on one and get that done and get it done right and be able to present that, then good to go.
Okay.
Metering.
Well,
Go.
if I may.
Yeah.
So Karen and I were yakking about this a little bit last night, after your meeting. And the idea was some sort of system that wouldn't involve hard dates, you know, from January 1st to the next January 1st, something that would be kind of flowing for a year. So the idea would be to create a limit, or in fact, I laughed out loud this morning when I was typing this out. Growth overnight accommodations limit, or goal. So anyway, so the goal the council would set.
That's awesome. So what is it again, Mike?
So, it's in here, it's on the second
Growth
page.
overnight accommodation limit.
Limit, yeah, it's on, you don't have to write it down, it's all right there. But the idea is, in other words, suppose council decided, in their infinite wisdom, that we wanted no more than 100 rooms per year in town, okay, for example. And I'm trying to normalize this by the size of the town as well, because I think that would go over better with the state legislature. If we're a bigger town, everything else being considered, we could probably accumulate more overnight accommodations, even if that doesn't really meet another argument I made earlier today, but that's another story. So you would set this, for example, suppose that you wanted 100 new rooms a year, then you would, and suppose the town had 5,000 residents, just to make the numbers come out easy, then you'd have, the goal would be 20 rooms per year per 1,000 residents, okay? And you can kind of forget the per 1,000 residents thing if you consider the population fixed, 100 rooms per year. So the first applicant comes in, all right, and he says, gee, I want to build a 100-room hotel. Or maybe he says, I want to build a 50-room hotel. So you accept his app, saying nobody else is in the pipeline, and off he goes. And then we call the day that his app is submitted as day 0. 365 days later, if nothing else has happened, the count starts all over again, okay? And you could build another 100 rooms, for example. But halfway through the year, if he applied for 50 rooms, then 25 rooms still remain, now become in the pipeline. I'll describe all this for you. So if another app comes in, well, but it's a simpler example. Suppose the second app comes in later the same day, and this guy says, I want to build 50 rooms as well. You say, that's fine. 50 is already in the pipeline for the next year. You can build another 50-room hotel. If he says, I want to build a 100-room hotel, you say you're going to have to wait until the 50-room year is, no, you have to wait half a year is what he'd have to do. See what I'm saying? Because in other words, if the first guy wanted 50, I'll write out the math for it. But the idea is it slowly tapers off linearly as you go through the year. So a year later, everything starts all over again. And you keep a running total of how many apps there are active at the time. So there's somebody comes in and you've already got 100 rooms in progress, for example, and that's your limit. Then you set that guy's apps aside until 100 rooms are available. That's the idea.
So do you queue the apps that come in the meantime?
Right, correct. And that's the question about legality I have for you, okay? Think about metering.
So
Because typically that doesn't happen if a use is permitted, guy submits an app, off he goes, right?
So under your hypo, if you had someone request 50, and then someone the next day request 50 more, and on the third day someone came in and requested 100,
Right.
that 100 gets queued
For a year.
for a year. And so now if someone comes in behind them with 50, even though 50 are going to become available before the full 100 does, the 50 still can't go until, so the 100 ties up the queue until it can get to 100?
Good question.
I'm just trying to make sense so we know how to write it up.
Yeah. I hear your point.
Out of respect for developers that get their stuff together, I would say it's a line.
I would have to be, because if you had someone request 25 rooms, and then 90 days someone 25 rooms, then 90 days after that 25, and 90 days after that 25, the 100 would be spread out at that point a quarter at a time. And if someone came in and requested 50 rooms, if you didn't queue them, that person would probably never get their rooms, because it'd always be 25 at a time would be popping up, and someone would be taking those 25. And if you were requesting 50, and maybe that's not an issue, because you're still only getting 100 rooms and you're not ever getting the big, I don't know, but I think that would run into legal problems if certain people could just never get their 50. I think you'd have to put them in a queue where
In the queue is time of application.
they would tie it, and that would be fine to tie it up, but
But it almost seems it would be better to do it off of square footage instead of room numbers, possibly.
I would argue that room numbers are what counts. That's traffic, that's cars on the road. How big the room is.
if you did it off square footage, just thinking out loud, if you figured out like 200 square feet, whatever a room is, 300 square feet, and you did it off square footage of what 100, and someone came in and you did it off square footage and they wanted to build big suite style overnight accommodations, you could have 20 units take up all of your square footage, which if we're doing it on square footage, I don't know that we care. I'm just saying you could actually end up, if you did it off square footage, you could actually end up with less rooms per year than if you did it off room numbers. And if you did it off square footage and it's 100, sorry, Nora, and you did it off 100 rooms and someone comes in and they build 700 square foot rooms or 600 square foot rooms, you end up with really big rooms that can house 10 to 12 people. So like, I don't know, it's.
I'm almost more concerned
Food for
with
thought.
pillows, just having
Yeah,
seen, a
exactly.
whole bunch of, college kids or, or, people having a reunion come in and it's great if you can save money and you can all bunk together, but you might then instead of having 2 cars have 6. So, yeah.
I have to think about that. That's a great idea. I mean, I started to say, well, the guy who wants another 100 rooms would just have to wait, but he could keep getting preempted by somebody building smaller hotels, if somebody comes in.
So I think we would have to come up with how metering policy-wise would work. I guess what we need to know as staff is how do we want to set the limits? Do we want it to be rooms? Do we want it to be square footage? I guess that's what we need from you guys, and then we'll try and figure out. That's a great start, because I don't know that any of us had even started kicking around how to make that policy a reality. I think that's the info that we would need, though, Nora, in order to be able to start figuring out a policy to implement.
So what happens if we have somebody who has a piece of property and our max is 60,000 square feet that they can build, but it's gonna go over that room cap? Because the Bowen was used as an example last night, and it's like at 20,000, that's 20,000 square feet. And I was like, well, I have it's 44 rooms is what they have. So are we deterring somebody who owns one of those large parcels to ever have the option to, because if we're
No,
gonna say it's 100 rooms,
you're encouraging them to subdivide and have a larger impact by building 3 hotels instead of 1.
right. That's another thing. Do we have a minimum on acreage for those properties? And are we gonna have a limit on how much a piece of property can be subdivided?
Okay.
I mean, you're
think-
opening up a can of worms.
Absolutely. I think so. What I'm hearing from council is we want metering, and now figure out how that works. And I think that's a good place to start. Okay.
That's a great question. Subdividing parcels to get around building and project size restrictions, right?
Yeah, and I would expect that we would probably see that. And that may or may not. I mean, it would certainly break up the scale so that you wouldn't, have a lot of big, huge buildings, but.
So then maybe metering on something that's more tangible, and that's water hookups, sewer hookups. I mean, something that's, more concrete than just an esoteric, oh, we don't want more than 100 rooms this year in our valley. I mean,
Yeah.
like, it would feel better that.
If there was some rational.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the only thing that I would share is that we're putting, if we stick to our guns with the baseline environmental, specifically water and electric goals, and the height requirement, you can only go 2 stories unless you do this bonus commercial or affordable housing, then you get 3. That's kind of, to me, like indirect metering, meaning we're already metering in a way how much growth is going to happen in the overnight accommodations sector by having stricter requirements. So how I have felt about metering is that I'm less worried about metering by number, and I'm more interested in metering by what we want to see. So staying tough on our requirements, and then if they meet them, it's kind of a party, because they're not sucking energy, they're not using a ton of water, they're providing community benefit, and they're not going to be too big. So it's sort of a indirect metering as opposed to a meter by number that I have felt is, again, how I was hoping to meter as opposed to meter by number. But I understand an additional kind of like, all right, but if everybody was able to meet that criteria, and we got 1,000 more rooms or 1,000 more pillows in our queue and they were meeting that, I guess then the question is to the council, like, if we had 1,000 pillows built to those standards, would that feel too much? Or would that be like, hey, no worries, because like they're held to such strict standards, including like shuttle stops and.
I just think,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I think metering by its own definition means measuring. So you have to have something measurable. And while energy consumption and transportation, they're all measurable, they're all tangible things. We've got to have something defensible that we meter with. And if that does mean water hookups or sewer hookups, or if we're just counting pillows, I don't know, but we've got to have something that we measure by. It can't just be
100. Can't be arbitrary.
It can't be arbitrary, and we can't physically walk down to that zone and go, oh, this feels good today, this is metered.
Yep.
You know, we've got to have something to measure.
Okay.
What's wrong with pillows, Donnie?
Nothing's wrong with pillows, if that's what you're using to measure by,
Yeah, okay. Oh, I agree, you have to have
I
something
use
about
3
it.
pillows every night.
unless they're.
I don't know, I'm willing to have a pillow fight over it.
Just each of your pillows have a parking space. Yeah.
Maybe you know,
Fight, Phil.
sorry, I digress. Why the current rage to have 15,000 pillows on your bed when you, no, I don't get out.
It's for the pillow fights, Mike.
It's a girl thing, Mike, and we do it just to annoy our husbands.
Some are soft, some are medium, and some are hard.
That's exactly right.
That's exactly right.
You gotta pick which one you like best. I want
Well, I like
options.
one of each. See?
Well, Joel, I'll think about it and throw out some ideas, but you guys can take it from there about how you want to do
Nora, can you remind me when we started all of this and, we had the information, I can't right now remember if and I'm sure you saw it later because Jeff might have initially put some of it together. It could have come from Landmark, but I feel like, we had documents showing us some of the examples from other communities. I'm trying to remember if any of those communities were metering or, do you remember?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't believe that they were, but I know that there are some that are. Springdale might.
Mm-hmm.
And I could take a look at that. Well, I'll look at, and part of our efforts as a staff is to look at what other people have done too. It would be best if it was somebody in Utah, just because
Yeah.
there's apples to apples, but.
And do you guys have any sense if people use one criteria or a combination? Because so far it seems like we've talked about water and maybe sewer and then maybe either the square footage or pillow or unit. And then maybe ratio of overnight to resident. So it seems like there are a lot of options there. Like, what's
Yeah,
your
we got-
recommendation that you guys come back and give some pros and cons to those? or-
Carly just made the point
Yeah,
that one of the reasons for metering in reality, for us, would be staff capacity to oversee the projects and our ability to actually inspect and keep things properly being done. So that's something we could rationally basis tie a restriction to the number of projects we're allowing is our ability to actually process them and inspect them and keep them moving along, so.
What if we get a project that's like 450 pillows? Because
How-
resort commercial,
Yeah, how many is?
there are big parcels up there, and one project might submit an application that meets all our criteria and has like 450 pillows.
and-
Well, it can only be 60,000 square feet.
Yep. So how many?
Wait,
Yeah.
per building.
No,
20.
20,000 square feet per building. 60,000 square foot.
Total
per
project.
So
If
then
you
would
use the incentive.
Okay, but then you subdivide and you have an application that has 5 projects and
They would have to be separate, but yeah, that's the risk you're
100
running.
units. Then one project will suck up the entire, for like several years, the meter.
It's
I
a
don't-
complicated, it's a
Yeah.
complicated thing.
Possibility.
Yeah.
And is that gonna be like if we open overnight accommodations to other commercial zones, are they gonna be in the same pipeline? Or is it gonna be by zone?
That's a good
It's a
question.
great
too.
question.
I think metering's complicated.
It's
I
extremely
don't- it is.
complicated.
I think that I'd rather have, again, what I said before, standards that developers can, that it's a yes right away. They can look at the standards and they can say, that's my meter, I'm out, versus
Here, we're-
in.
Well, I'd like to point out that the wastewater treatment plant, though, so we were expected to not have to build the second facility or the second, I forgot what it's called.
The
like,
batch,
the
blah, 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 blah.
For 20 years. That has been reduced.
To 10 years, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, these are realistic burdens on our infrastructure. So I mean, as difficult as metering can be, I mean, we really need to look at how much we can withstand.
Support.
Yeah. So, good luck, guys. I don't know how you, I'm like, I mean, I don't know how you do it, but it does need to be done.
It's hard. It's, you know, I mean, I have worked in places, one place, where we metered, and there's a big fight over what made a complete application, and, I mean,
Oh,
it's just,
yeah.
you know, you get, yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah.
Not impossible.
So Karen, where you're headed, let me elaborate just a bit. I know the county, when I was over on the county side, any new app was accompanied by a will serve letter, oftentimes by
Yes.
GWSSA. Yeah, we're gonna get you water, you want water, we got water. To my knowledge, the city has never turned anybody down for that sort of reason. But if water's availability becomes a serious concern, then the city could consider denying an application simply because we simply don't have the water.
Or
So-
we change water policy,
Or we change water policy, yeah.
which would work places where applicants are required to bring their own water to the table. So they have to go acquire their water and bring it with their application and provide their own water for their project.
And Emily, if I may add, I hear what you're saying about, you know, if you're really energy and water efficient, we love you, you know, you can go ahead and just make that your standards. And the trick, I would think, in writing standards like that would be to, it seems to me there's a thin line, if you will, between something that's like water efficient toilets. Well, everybody, it's already code, you know, I mean, they think, oh, that's no problem at all. Something that really won't make much of an impact, and writing something that's truly a high hurdle. For example, the energy, what do they call them, the LEED certified homes?
For the living building challenge.
Yeah, with
Like
gray
the-
water systems, black water systems,
Where
all
you can
kinds.
only use the amount of water that you could collect from a roof.
I mean, you could make them jump through all kinds of extravagant hoops like that. And I think Karen had a good point. The question of objections by owners, a form of private property rights infringement, if you will, if you try to make them do something that's realistically not feasible to do.
Well, I'd just like to repeat that, I mean, the property rights does say, I mean, you can make a profit off of your property, but it doesn't mean, you know, if we give you options A through Y and you don't have A through Z, it's still totally legal, so. I mean, this is one thing I keep coming back to, like, what is our ultimate goal here? And it's something that people who've been writing us are saying, like, is our ultimate goal to have a thriving community that can sustain itself long-term, or is it to maximize the profit for a limited number of people in the short term? So I think we all came into it feeling like we were trying to do the former, you know, with respect for the latter, but it's part of what makes these decisions difficult. But
And that's our understanding as staff. And our goal is to make it so the community in the long term is the plan. And we're trying to balance what is an exaction. Exactions are legal, right? So long as there's a reasonable nexus as to why you're requiring the give for what the impact is. So we're always trying to make sure that the give is as much as we can get for what the impact is, and that when we put land use restrictions in place, that they're not to the point that it's a takings that's requiring compensation. Restriction by itself is a taking, it's not illegal. So that's what our understanding as well, and that's our goal, is to make sure our exactions can be upheld and that our takings are enforceable.
I'm just gonna say too, if a hotel developer builds to these standards, they're likely gonna be able to charge more and have more visitors than the more traditional hotels, because they'll be so cool. They'll get cool points and visitors in Moab.
There is a market of people, who will gravitate to that,
Yeah. So it's, in a way, it's also setting new development up for success as our market of who comes and visits Moab expands.
Karen, can you just get me a refresher, like on your meetings going to the chamber? Are we hearing anything like specifically from hotels about their occupancy rates? I mean, I always have in the back of my mind, just from a capitalist standpoint, like at what point, are rooms still amply full, and at what point are people, maybe not profiting as much because we have so many rooms in the community that I don't know if there's been any commentary like that yet. Yeah.
In fact, Emily and I tried to have a conversation separately because
Yeah.
at the chamber, they try not to bring.
Specific data or
Yeah,
something, yeah.
They haven't. And
Fair
so
enough.
there's been
Yeah.
another committee that has formed, and it's to sort of address those issues. I mean, if you talk to some of the owners, they're saying that their numbers are down, that the vacancy rates are up. And then it's also that discussion, okay, is it down because there's now X amount more on the books? So, but they're just saying.
Yeah, I understand it's not our responsibility to
like
regulate or get involved with, but.
Can't answer
Yeah.
that because there hasn't been a cohesive discussion about
Yeah.
that at the chamber.
I realize it's getting late, so I wanted to ask you, Joel, since, I feel like some of the community has asked for more meetings, and I certainly don't mind more. It seems like you were saying staff would like more. Like, does it make sense to follow this up with another meeting? I know I still have some questions on
Yeah.
massing and,
It
because it seems
does.
like the 20,000, 60,000, and,
I would ask that we, based off next week being a holiday, and I think that's where we are at this point, I would ask that we extend our meeting on the 6th. Nora, would that work for you?
No, we had a meeting on the 6th.
Sixth?
December 6th, we have a budget meeting from 10 to noon.
Right.
Oh, wait a minute, but aren't we
We're meeting on the 10th as well.
looking at the football and passing it back to planning commission?
I thought they were done with it. Oh, yeah.
Are they? No, because they,
Not done with it,
Are
but they
doing a
really do
public
want
hearing.
direction from you.
So I think Nora, tell me what you would like to do, what your plan would be. Because I was thinking we would extend the meeting on the 6th, have another one of these, and then present something on the 10th to council at a public hearing so we can get public comment, and then try and get something back to planning to actually push through.
We could do that. We can talk about it more. My head's kind of swimming right now, so. But I
Okay.
think that that's doable.
Is there any way to do it sooner? Only because the 6th is when we're all in the run-up for the packets, so we're all
That's the
busy
problem
preparing
with-
for our
that's-
packets, plus we're making then potentially more last-minute changes before we're supposed to maybe have a hearing. I don't know if we're having a hearing.
So
I can do Monday next week, but I don't know if that works for other people.
Well, I wouldn't have any time to.
yeah, Monday's too
do
quick for
anything.
Nora when I talked to Nora. December 2nd or 3rd would be great. That would allow us to get something back into the packet for the 10th, which makes it lots easier. The problem with the 2nd or 3rd is that we'd have to do it after hours. Yeah, no, we could do it later.
without me. I mean,
Well, or we could do it at 5. or 5:30. Doesn't have to be done during the day.
do we need another meeting because we want to give others the opportunity to review? I feel personally that I was able to make comments today for planning commission to review. Do council members feel like there's still more to share and deliberate? Because I feel like we've all shared a lot, and and that we've come to consensus on certain things to move forward. So I don't know that we need another meeting. I'd like to get the planning commission to put it out there for public comment. So it's really just if this council feels like they weren't heard today, that we would need another meeting.
So
No, I felt heard. I just feel like there's
the question is,
more,
yeah, the question is, from what we heard today, are you comfortable that we're far enough down that road with what we heard today that we can now prepare something and that it can go to Planning Commission for public hearing, that it's close enough to being that done? Or from what we heard today, we go and make these changes, implement what we've heard today and bring it back to you for another round of these based off what we bring you that time and take that back to planning? Like, do we feel like we need to do this again with what we've heard today, implement it into a document?
I would like that, because we haven't gotten to the massing, the size. And I don't know what other issues other people had.
More content that we need to
That's my sense too.
sift through and discuss.
Okay. Then we're
yeah,
setting another
so,
meeting before Planning Commission meets again.
I just can't take vacation time.
No,
I
I-
will make it work.
No, I'm understanding that.
Whatever you need.
When does the next time Planning Commission meets?
I'm sorry?
Wednesday, the 4th?
No.
Yeah, we
The
talked
Wednesday
about
meeting?
we talked about, with the planning commission, having a special meeting. And
What if we joined?
we can try. Getting a time when the majority of everybody can meet is pretty tricky, but we can certainly
It is.
try.
And Nora's birthday is next week. I don't want to
That
run
doesn't
too
matter.
hard. Okay.
I mean, like I said,
Your birthday's next week, that's Thanksgiving week. We wouldn't be meeting next week. We're talking December 4th.
We could, this room is opened at 6 PM on Monday the 2nd, or it's open 7 PM on Tuesday the 3rd.
There's an open house for
The truth and taxation meetings both days.
As the 3rd,
ones.
right?
The second is mosquito abatement, and I think the third is the library and the general county one.
and the design committee advisory, like the open
That's
house for
from
the.
4 to 6.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking
Okay.
at that.
On the
Okay.
3rd.
That's on the Monday the 2nd. The
that's
design
the
committee is
3rd.
in this room from 4 to 6. Then, not in this room. I don't know where it may be in that little.
Oh, and then the open house,
Yeah, then
is-
the DPS public meeting has this room from 5 to 7
gotcha,
the next night.
on
So-
the 3rd.
Yep, on the
Okay.
3rd. So this room becomes available at 6 PM on Monday the 2nd, becomes available at 7 PM on Tuesday the 3rd.
Gotcha.
Is there, what's the thoughts, what about on Wednesday, the 4th? If you're having a document prepared for this council to review, to incorporate what we talked about today for a final review before it goes to the Planning Commission, why not do a joint meeting?
Yeah.
And the council and Planning Commission can look at it together. And then the next step is public hearing.
yeah, they had talked about meeting December 5th.
Thursday?
Oh, Thursday, not
Yeah.
Wednesday.
But I told them after we talked that I would get back to them. So we could do a joint meeting one of the days of that week.
Would it be possible for Planning Commission to do it on the 2nd or 3rd? The only reason and it's the same point Ronnie made already.
Not the 3rd, because that's the big
Yeah, sorry, the
budget meeting
2nd.
at the county.
The only reason I'm hesitant on the 4th or the 5th is you're getting late into the packet for the 10th, to get something back into the packet for the 10th. And if you guys, as long as we all understand that and we do it on the 4th or the 5th, and we know that you may not get this for your packet until Monday or
Doesn't it need
Tuesday.
to be a public hearing?
We're going to do that on the
Public
10th.
hearing's on the 10th, and it has to be advertised
Yeah.
7 days before.
Yeah.
But
Why are we concerned about the county's budget meeting?
So we can attend if we choose to.
you got to get out more.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's more that if we have a meeting that community members
Yeah.
are concerned about overnight accommodation and they're concerned about budget,
They can go to both.
yeah.
What time is that? What time, those are at 7 that
I
night?
believe they're both at 6, but
yeah.
Let's make this hard for Carter.
We
Can't
know
be two
that
places
Karen
at
doesn't
once.
care.
why do we feel like we have to do all this before Christmas?
Well, I feel like there's at least another meeting in here for council to get something that they can look at. There's another meeting where we have to have a public hearing. There's a meeting after that where we're gonna have to look at it again, which leaves us 1 or 2 meetings after. So if we don't do it at this time scale, we now are just having the December 10th meeting, which will be the meeting you just look at this, which now puts us into January, and now you have 1 or 2 meetings before the legislature starts.
What if we did a public hearing for
I'm-
Tuesday, the 17th, December 17th?
I'm fine with that.
And then noticing is fine.
Council
And we
member.
can discuss in the.
I'm fine with that, but in the year I've been here with this council, I've been told we don't like stuff coming at us where it has to be passed and we're down to the wire, and so I'm really trying to avoid that scenario.
I
So as
know.
long as we
Real
all are
close to
comfortable with
Christmas.
that.
I just would rather do it right than fast.
Well, I think that by having the more meetings, we are doing it right and not fast, because if we get a meeting in on the 2nd or the 4th, that leaves us the 10th. That would leave us time in December to do another one. That would leave us 2 more in January. Like, I'm trying to make it so you're having the
Okay.
potential to have 4 to 6 meetings, not we don't do any more till after Christmas, and then you really only have 3 left to get it done. So
Okay.
to me, the less meetings is a faster, more rushed approach than more meetings giving us more time to keep working at it if we have to.
Okay, all right.
But
just
I will
was just-
support whatever you guys want.
So legislative session starts January 27th.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to have something for the.
The residential zone, yeah, would be great
Okay.
if we had something in that.
So-
Just tell me where we have to be.
What I was just saying is that we could schedule December 17th, Tuesday. That's before school is out for Christmas. We could schedule our public hearing on Tuesday, December 17th. That gives us the opportunity to have a meeting,
On the 10th?
well, a meeting on the 4th or 5th if we want.
Okay.
And then we're looking at our regular meeting on the 10th. And then we would have public hearing on the 17th.
I won't be here, and my only feeling about that is it's a pretty close to Christmas for a lot of businesses.
The 17th
So-
is also county council.
And I will not be here that week, the 16th through the 20th. I have to be in Junction,
Okay.
so.
I think we leave the public hearing on the 10th because that is far enough away from Christmas that people who want to attend will still be in town. I think you get into that next week and people are gone, like Ronnie mentioned.
We just have to notice the public hearing today
I think, well,
We-
yeah, today or Monday.
Yeah, we have time.
when we publish our agenda,
So I just want to
before we
point out
publish
that
our agenda.
when we publish the public notice, we should have a pretty solid document
Right.
that the public can review. And so if you're having a meeting here and a meeting here, and I have to publish the public notice next week, what document is the public going to look at? Something needs to be pretty solid. I mean,
What,
make changes here and there, but
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be pretty solid. The whole point of the public comment is so they can come give their changes and you can implement that in the document. You could have a public hearing where by the time you're done with the public hearing, what you were contemplating is completely different than what you started with. That's the whole point of it. So we just need something that they can review to have a general idea of what we're doing.
So this document that Nora has presented to us today is
Yeah, good enough.
Is fine for that
Absolutely,
process.
Absolutely.
So Emily, Joe, are either of you contemplating a vote on the actual code at one of these meetings that you're
No.
speaking of?
Not till January.
Not till
Not till
January.
Okay. Well, you know, I think in my opinion, I agree with Summer. I think we've made great progress here since last night. I feel like I'm beginning to see a path forward that we can resolve on, and compromises as always, and I'm looking forward to that. But on the other hand, we still got a world of little details, and frankly, Nora, I haven't really paid too much attention to the code because I know it's going to change big time. And I will have to get into every freaking word in this thing before I'm going to say aye. All right, and that's going to take some time. So if you can make the schedule work before Christmas, I'll be around. It's fine with me. But I got a feeling we're going to run into a bunch of schedule problems, and it wouldn't be any heartbreak to me to schedule fewer meetings and carry on forthwith in January.
What are our 2 meetings in January?
14th, 28th.
Great.
Joel, I agree with you that it doesn't have to be a solid document. I understand that the public is going to make comments and that's going to change. But my concern is that if there are additional changes that take place between Planning Commission and City Council before we get that document out, and those aren't out there. That was more my concern, was with special City Council meetings, and especially special Planning Commission meetings, that document is ready to send out. Not necessarily a document that the public's going to make comments on, because yes, that's going to change, but it should be pretty solid between what Planning Commission and City Council want, or what their vision is. To put it out there so people have a document to review, to make comments on.
Could we do a public hearing not on the 10th, but our next meeting?
We could do it into January. I'm open to however you guys want to do it. Like I said, I've been told for a year, we don't like being rushed, we don't like having enough public input. If we wanted to have a public hearing on December 10th and have another one the first meeting in January and have 2, whatever gives you guys the comfort that you've heard from your constituents, that you've had enough meetings, that you've had time to talk about this, that's what I'm trying to provide for you.
I'm more concerned about meeting with the Planning Commission and making sure Nora feels good that she has something to go forward with.
So how do you guys want to proceed?
My personal opinion is that public hearing in December is a little premature, in the sense that we really haven't nailed down, we don't have, in my opinion, good enough consensus with what we want to do between Nora's group and ourselves yet. To enlist the public, actually, they're going to, public hearings are great, but, they're not going to come to public, they're going to come to one meeting and expect to know what's going on, and whether they'll have some of the energy to come back a second time remains to be seen. Anyway, I'm sorry I said that. That was kind of confusing.
Is it possible to extend the one on the 6th? I know that was something that was thrown out, to where you could have the budget meeting and potentially Planning Commission. I don't know.
I am just not sure we're going to be able to hit the noticing thing.
We wouldn't be a public hearing on the
Public
6th.
hearing,
It'd just be a meeting with council.
Yeah.
The land use ordinance only requires 10-day public notice.
Except for most of the public commissioners, the planning commissioners cannot come during the day.
Right.
Right, they were silly things, jobs.
I'm curious if there's going to be substantial public comment that would significantly change what you have proposed, what we're reviewing right now.
But that's not the point of a public hearing. The public hearing is for the public to be heard.
Well, to comment on a document.
Right.
So I'm just saying,
And that's what we hear that they want. They want to be heard. They want.
And who knows what they'll say?
And who knows what they'll say.
It may completely change it.
It may
maybe
not
nothing.
change one word in the document, but the point of the public hearing is to let them have their say.
right, so what I'm saying though is, the comments that we hear may or may not, but back to the original question of, is this document that we're looking at public hearing ready?
Well, it's likely that it will be by the 10th.
And we want to have the public hearing early enough in the process that if there are things that are said that drastically change it or make us want to reconsider it, that we have time to
We can make
go
those
in and make those
changes.
changes and adopt what the public is asking if it works for.
But don't we need a public hearing at Planning Commission?
We are required to
had it
have
last
one at
night.
planning last night, and
yesterday.
we've had it. We've met our legal requirements for public
On
hearings.
this document.
Yep.
It makes sense that we would then do
We could
This
do another one with the.
no, this document is our public hearing.
That's what we're trying to do. We're not required to. We're providing more open to government than we're required to, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good.
All right,
good
when are we
thing.
doing a workshop?
Yep. What do you want to do?
Let's go.
The second is better for me than those other days. I'm supposed to be in Grand Junction those other days, but
I can do the second.
Second works for me too.
The second
You
at
said at
7?
6 o'clock?
6? The room's available at 6, so anytime after 6.
unless anyone really needed to go to Mosquito